I grew up in a big gray house on Willow Lane, a quiet street lined with ancient maple trees, just outside Boston, Massachusetts. It wasn't one of those storybook mansions that tourists take photos of, but to me, it was the center of the universe. The house had 3 stories, 12 windows on the front alone, and an old red door that stuck in the summer heat. There was always the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, and the smell of old books from my father's study. Sometimes I think I can still hear his laughter echoing off those dark, wooden floors. My father, Charles Everly, was a good man, honest, gentle, and always just a little tired. He worked as a lawyer in downtown Boston, spending his days defending people who couldn't afford anyone else. He loved jazz, especially the records he played every Saturday night when the whole house seemed to hum with music. He filled our home with red roses from the garden every spring, and he taught me to play chess on rainy afternoons, his warm hands carefully moving each piece across the board. He told me stories about Europe, about his time in Paris after law school, and promised me that one day I would see the world too. My mother, Margaret, was different. She was a tall, elegant woman from London who seemed to float through life without ever really touching it. Her beauty was the cold kind, flawless and distant. She rarely smiled, and if she did, it was only for my older sister, Lena. Mother's affection was like winter sun, thin, pale, and almost impossible to feel. She was always dressed in navy blue or black, her blonde hair pinned into a perfect twist. She was proud of our family name, proud of our old silver, and the thick carpets in the dining room. Most of all, she was proud of Lena. Lena was everything I was not. She had golden hair and eyes like emeralds, and she moved through the world with the kind of confidence I could never fake. She laughed like crystal and smiled like she'd been taught exactly how to do it for an audience. Even as a child, Lena had a way of getting what she wanted, sometimes with kindness, sometimes with cruelty. I watched her charm teachers, neighbors, and even strangers at the grocery store. I was always the quiet one in the corner, reading or listening, wondering how it would feel to belong the way Lena did. For most of my childhood, I believed our family was like anyone else's. We ate dinner together every night, even if the conversation was stiff and formal. On holidays, Mother would hang silver wreaths on the door, and Father would pour glasses of sherry for the neighbors. Lena and I sat beside each other at the piano, pretending to get along for the sake of the photograph. But under the surface, I always felt something cold and sharp growing, something I didn't have a name for yet. When I turned 20, everything changed. My father died in late autumn, just as the leaves turned gold and red. It was sudden, a heart attack in the middle of the night. I woke up to the sound of my mother's voice, calm and controlled, telling the paramedics that everything was under control. At the funeral, the church was packed with people my father had helped, men and women in old suits, their faces streaked with tears. I remember standing at the back, holding Lena's hand, feeling numb and small in my black dress. The day after the funeral, Mother called me into the library. The fireplace was lit, but the room felt colder than ever. She stood behind Father's old desk, her back straight, her blue eyes sharp as ice. "Sarah," she said, her voice flat, "your father left everything to Lena, the house, the bank accounts, even the old Steinway piano. You can take your clothes and leave." I remember staring at her, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. Lena stood beside her, arms crossed, her lips twisted into a half smile. Her eyes glittered in the firelight, and for a moment, I saw nothing of the sister I'd grown up with, only a stranger with my father's eyes and my mother's heart. I tried to argue, to plead, but Mother silenced me with a look. "This is not a debate, Sarah. Your father's will is clear. Lena will inherit everything. You may take your things and go. The driver will take you wherever you want." Her words were like a knife, and I felt them slice away what little hope I had left. I packed my things, just a duffel bag of clothes, my old chess set, a few books, and $50 from the last birthday card my father ever gave me. Lena watched from the staircase, arms folded, as I walked to the door. She didn't say a word. Mother stood in the hallway, her face unreadable, as the driver set my bag in the trunk. They locked the doors behind me, and I stood on the front step for a long moment, staring at the windows where I had once played hide and seek. Boston in November is brutal. The wind cuts through you, even if you have a coat, and the sky always seems gray. I walked for miles at night, not really sure where I was going. I watched my breath rise in little clouds, my hands stuffed deep in my pockets. The city felt huge and empty. I ended up under a stone bridge by the river, curling up on the cold ground, listening to the water move past. Streetlights reflected on the black water, shimmering and broken. I didn't sleep much that first night. The sounds of the city were new to me, the distant wail of sirens, the rumble of trains, the voices of strangers drifting on the wind. I wrapped my coat tighter around me and tried not to cry. I realized how quickly a person can disappear in a city like Boston, how easy it is to become invisible when no one is looking for you. That was the night I learned what loneliness means. That was the night I understood that the world can change in a heartbeat, and that the people you trust most can be the ones who break you. I lay awake until morning, my body aching from the cold, thinking of my father's voice and the house on Willow Lane, and promising myself that one day I would find a way back, not to the house, but to myself. After my mother and Lena threw me out of the only home I'd ever known, I became a ghost in my city. For weeks, I drifted through Boston's gray streets, clutching my duffel bag as if it might disappear if I let go. The nights were the worst, so cold I could barely sleep, even wrapped in my thin coat under a bridge or behind the steam vents near the old train station. During the days, I wandered from place to place, watching people hurry past, wondering if any of them could see me. Sometimes I stared at my reflection in a shop window and barely recognized the girl looking back. The first time I stole bread was out of desperation. It was from a corner bakery, the kind where the smell of fresh rolls floats out onto the street and makes your stomach ache. I hesitated at first, afraid someone would notice, but hunger is a kind of fear all its own. I grabbed a small loaf and ran. No one chased me. I ate the bread behind the dumpster, my hands shaking. It was the first time I broke a rule, and it wouldn't be the last. Days blurred together. I scavenged for food, used the public library for warmth, and collected small bits of change I found on the sidewalk. I learned to avoid the places where police liked to patrol. Once, a woman in a navy suit glanced at me sitting on a bench and pressed a $5 bill into my hand before hurrying away. I held onto that bill for days, unwilling to let go of such a kindness. After 2 months in Boston, the cold became unbearable. I decided to take a bus to New York City with the little money I had left. New York was bigger, louder, and more anonymous, exactly what I needed. I slept in train stations, curled up in the hard plastic seats, pretending to wait for someone who never arrived. I watched the city's energy, the constant motion, the endless rush of people. I listened and learned, the pickpockets who moved through crowds like fish in water, the hustlers selling fake watches on corners, the rich in their town cars, and the poor sheltering under newspapers. I became invisible. I learned to listen more than I spoke. I studied faces, voices, the way people walked and carried themselves. I realized that the world had layers, the glittering surface everyone admired, and the shadowy depths beneath it where the rest of us lived. I felt a strange sort of freedom, being unknown. I could be anyone. I could disappear at any time. It was on a night that started like any other, cold and drizzly, with mist curling along the pavement, that everything changed. I was wandering near the old bakery on Mulberry Street, thinking of nothing in particular, when I spotted a stray gray cat weaving through the puddles. It looked back at me with bright, curious eyes before darting into a narrow alley behind the bakery. For reasons I still can't explain, I followed. Maybe I wanted to see where the cat would go. Maybe I was looking for anything to make me feel less alone. The alley was tight, the walls slick with rain, and the only light came from a flickering bulb above a rusty green door at the end. There was no handle on the door, just a narrow crack at the bottom, wide enough for the cat to slip through. I hesitated, but then I pressed my hand against the door. It creaked open, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, I found a world I never could have imagined. The space was bigger than I expected, low ceilings, peeling paint, and old couches pushed against the walls. Smoke curled in the air, mixing with the smell of strong coffee and something metallic. There were people everywhere, men and women, young and old, dressed in every style you could imagine. Some hunched over laptops, others played cards, or spoke quietly in corners. No one looked up as I entered, except for the gray cat, who wound around my legs and disappeared beneath a table. I hovered in the doorway until a tall man with dark hair and tattoos on his knuckles approached. He looked me up and down, then gave a quick nod. "First time?"
he asked, his voice low and amused. I nodded, heart pounding. He led me further inside.
"Name's Jack, Chicago-born. You don't have to give your name. Not here. If you've got secrets, you'll fit right in." That was how I met the club, a place for outcasts, hackers, thieves, and runaways. No one cared where you came from. All that mattered was what you could do, and whether you could be trusted. Over the next weeks, I learned their rules: loyalty, silence, and always remember where you came from. If you betrayed the club, you were out forever. If you needed help, you only had to ask. There was Maria, a safecracker from Spain who had grown up in London. She spoke with a thick accent, wore her hair in braids, and could open any lock in under a minute. She taught me how to listen for the click of tumblers, how to keep my hands steady, and how to never rush. There was Quinn, a forger from Dublin, who could make a fake passport out of nothing but a printer and a roll of tape. And Jack, who was a legend in the hacking world, showed me how to disappear from security cameras, how to create a new identity online, how to slip into the dark web without leaving a trace. I was quick to learn. I had always been good at watching and listening, but now I had become good at everything else too. I wore gloves so I would never leave fingerprints. I learned how to dress like the wealthy to blend into a crowd, and how to move like a shadow when I needed to be unseen. I slipped into penthouses in Manhattan, stealing diamonds from hidden safes while the city slept. I broke into hotel rooms in Los Angeles and walked out with bags full of money, never taking more than the greedy could afford to lose. I kept my share in secret accounts, spread across America and Europe, each one protected by layers of false names and digital walls. We never stole from the poor, only from those who thought they were untouchable people like my mother and Lena, who believed they would always be safe behind their locked doors. With every job, my confidence grew. My world expanded. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I felt powerful, invisible, untouchable. But no matter how high I climbed or how far I ran, there were nights when I couldn't escape my past. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling of whatever safe house or rented room one found myself in, and remember the house on Willow Lane, my father's gentle voice and my mother's cruel smile. I promised myself that one day I would return not as the girl they threw away, but as someone they could never ignore again. And that promise kept me moving, deeper into the shadows until I was ready for whatever came next. 10 years. 10 long, relentless years. Sometimes, when I stand at the glass wall of my penthouse and look out over the lights of Chicago, I still can't believe how far I've come from that first night under the Boston Bridge. In those early days, survival was all I knew. But as the seasons turned, I learned more than just how to survive. I learned how to become a shadow, how to turn pain into power, and how to build a life from the pieces nobody wanted. They called me the Ghost Queen. At first, it was just a whisper on the street, a story told in the secret club's smoky backroom. But the name followed me everywhere. The police never had a photograph. Security cameras saw only a figure in a black coat, masked and gloved, moving through the richest neighborhoods like smoke. Reporters in New York, Chicago, and even London filled pages with rumors of a woman who could vanish in an instant, a billionaire whose fortune was built on secrets nobody could trace. I liked it that way. I bought a penthouse in downtown Chicago with views of Lake Michigan, a place of glass and silence, high above the city's noise. I owned a tiny sunlit cabin in Vermont where I could breathe pine-scented air and let the world fade away. There was a flat in London too, its windows looking out over old brick streets and gray skies, all paid for in cash. All in names that could never be linked to Sarah Everly, the girl who had once slept beneath a bridge. Money was power. I funneled my earnings into companies and trusts that led nowhere. I owned pieces of hotels, art galleries, even a little tech startup in San Francisco that nobody ever connected to the Ghost Queen. My name was on nothing, but my fingerprints were everywhere if you knew where to look. Most nights I wore a silver mask and long black gloves at every meeting, my face hidden even from my closest partners. Even Jack, Maria, and Quinn, my first real friends, my chosen family, respected the boundaries I set. My rules were simple: Never speak my name, never take a picture. Never ask about my past, but the past never truly leaves you. It waits, silent and patient, in the dark corners of your mind. I kept tabs on Lena and my mother, of course. How could I not? I watched them from afar. The same way you might watch wild animals that once bit you. Lena had grown beautiful and sharp, her laughter louder than ever as she flitted from party to party in Boston's best neighborhoods. She drove new cars every year, hosted glittering fundraisers, and spent her dollars like they would never run out. Sometimes her photograph would appear in glossy magazines, her arm linked with some wealthy man or politician. She was always smiling, but I recognized the cold edge behind her eyes, the same one my mother had sharpened in me. Mother was harder to follow. She grew older, thinner, and somehow more dangerous with every passing year. I saw her at charity galas, dressed in navy or black, her hair still in that perfect twist. Her name was on the boards of several foundations, her reputation for icy discipline undiminished. But I could see the cracks if I looked closely. The bitterness in her voice when she spoke to reporters. The way she watched Lena, as if always judging, always measuring. The world believed they were happy. Only I knew the truth. For 10 years I watched and waited. I built my empire of secrets and shadows. My heart, once broken and desperate, became cold and focused. I knew how to move unseen, how to gather information, how to slit into the lives of the powerful and take what I needed. I never let my emotions cloud my judgment. I never let myself become careless. But I never forgot that night, the red door on Willow Lane closing behind me, the look on my mother's face as she turned away. That memory burned in my chest every day. I carried it with me even as I rose higher than I'd ever dreamed. It was a stormy night in March when I decided it was time. I remember standing by the window in Chicago, watching the rain hit the glass, thinking about how quickly the past can come back to life. My reflection stared back at me, masked and calm. I pulled on my black coat, slipped the silver mask over my face, and picked up the duffel bag I'd packed for this moment. It was time to go home. I flew to Boston on a private jet, using a name that would mean nothing to anyone. I rented a car and drove through the winding, rain-slick streets until the house on Willow Lane appeared, looming out of the mist. It looked the same gray stone, red door, 12 windows gleaming in the storm. There were guards now, of course. Alarms and cameras, a high fence around the yard. None of it mattered to me. I'd spent a decade learning how to get through doors far more secure than these. I waited until the city was asleep, the rain masking the sound of my footsteps. The alarm was child's play. I bypassed it in seconds, the code unchanged in all these years. The guards were easy, distracted by the storm and by the promise of easy money. I moved through the house like a memory, each room so familiar it almost hurt. I saw the grandfather clock, the faded chessboard, the fireplace where Lena had smiled at me the night they sent me away. In every room I left a small black box. Inside each box were documents, evidence of Lena and my mother's lies. Proof of the money they'd stolen from my father's old clients, letters they had written to each other, plotting how to frame me and cast me out. Bank records, emails, photographs, even a video of Lena forging my signature on papers I never saw. Everything I had collected over the years, every secret I'd uncovered, was there for the world to see. I moved silently, almost invisible, my heart pounding but steady. When I finished, I stood for a moment in the dark hall, listening to the rain and the sound of my breathing. I thought of my father, of the promises I'd made to myself on that first terrible night. I wasn't a scared girl anymore. I was the ghost queen, and I had come home on my terms. I slipped out as quietly as I had come, leaving only the boxes behind. The storm raged on, but inside me a different kind of peace began to grow, a sense that justice, long denied, was finally close at hand. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the city washed clean and strangely quiet. I watched from across Willow Lane, hidden in the shadow of a neighbor's garden wall, as the house where I'd once lived seemed to come awake in slow motion. The first sign that my plan had worked came at 6:30. When I saw the flashing blue and red lights strobe across the street, painting the old gray stone in jagged colors. Police cars slid to a stop in front of the gates, followed quickly by 2 black SUVs and a van marked with the emblem of the Boston Financial Crimes Unit. By the time the sun was up, the news vans had arrived too, antennas rising like skeletal fingers against the sky. Inside, the chaos had begun. Through the lace curtains, I could see Lena's silhouette running down the main staircase. Her phone pressed tight to her ear, hair wild, her robe half-tied. Two officers entered right behind her, moving with the quiet confidence of people who know exactly what they're looking for. In the front hall, a detective unsealed the first black box. He read through the papers, his expression hardening as the pieces fell into place. Word travels fast in neighborhoods like this, where privacy is bought with millions but gossip costs nothing. Within the hour, the gates of the house on Willow Lane were ringed with reporters and neighbors in expensive coats. I saw old Mrs. Avery from next door, peering over her glasses, and the Walsh brothers in their matching baseball jackets, staring as if they'd never really believed anything bad could happen on their street. From my vantage point, I watched as everything Lena and my mother had built began to crumble. The police went room by room, opening each box, photographing and cataloging every scrap of evidence I'd left behind. There were documents tracing stolen funds, emails arranging payoffs and bribes, forged signatures, even a video file showing Lena at my father's old desk, practicing my signature on stacks of blank checks. The lies they had lived for years hidden behind smiles and charity galas were laid bare for the world to see. It didn't take long for the fallout to spread. Reporters outside the gates broadcast every new detail, their voices sharp with excitement. The story swept across the city, then the country, then even further, to places I'd never seen but somehow felt close to. Bank accounts were frozen, millions of dollars in trust funds, investments, even the house itself. The lawyers came next, expensive and desperate, but they couldn't argue with the evidence. Not when it was signed, dated, recorded in my mother's careful handwriting and Lena's hurried scrawl. But the money wasn't what undid them, not really. People like Lena and my mother had always believed that money could solve anything, that reputation could be rebuilt, that a well-placed phone call could erase almost any stain. What truly destroyed them was the truth. The friends who had crowded their parties and filled their holiday tables vanished overnight, as if they'd never been there at all. Invitations were rescinded, business partners backed away, and the last shreds of their so-called respectability slipped through their fingers like water. When the officers finally entered the master bedroom, they found the last and most personal of my gifts. Written in red lipstick on the wall above the bed, in letters as tall as a child, was my final message. You forgot me. I will never forget you. I wanted those words to be the last thing they saw at night, and the first thing they saw in the morning. I wanted them to understand that I hadn't disappeared, that the girl they'd discarded had become someone they could never escape. I didn't need violence or threats. My truth was more than enough. And for the first time in my life, I felt seen, not as a victim, not as a shadow, but as a force in my own right. From across the street, I saw Lena stumble out onto the front steps, her face pale and streaked with tears. She crumpled onto the cold stone, surrounded by a world she could no longer control. Our mother stood at the upstairs window, rigid and silent, her face drawn and empty. She stared down at the police, the reporters, the neighbors, and the ruined world she had made for herself. In that moment, I saw not the cold, perfect woman of my childhood, but a lonely figure trapped by her own choices. I felt no pity, only the clean satisfaction of justice is finally done. The rain started again as I turned away, its soft drumming on the leaves matching the calm in my heart. I walked down Willow Lane, past the house where everything had ended and begun, feeling lighter with every step. My fortune was safe, my secrets protected by layers of digital code and the loyalty of friends I'd chosen myself. The Ghost Queen, the name whispered in fear and awe from New York to London, Paris to Chicago, was real, and I wore that mask gladly, not to hide, but to remind the world who I had become. I never looked back as I left that neighborhood for the last time. I boarded a flight to Chicago that night, sitting in first class with a book I never bothered to open. Outside the window, the city lights glittered in the rain, a reminder that every ending can be a new beginning. Over the years, I built a new life from the shadows. My fortune grew, my legend spread, and the world learned to respect the name of the Ghost Queen. But I never needed a family again, not the kind you're born with, anyway. I made my own family out of those who truly understood what it means to lose everything and start again. Jack, Maria, Quinn, they stood beside me, not because they had to, but because they chose to. Sometimes I think of the house on Willow Lane, the red door, the chessboard left by the fire. I remember my father's laughter, soft and kind, and I know that somewhere he would be proud not of the money or the legend, but of the woman I became when everything else was taken away. So, if you ever hear my name whispered in the dark, remember this: I am Sarah Everly. I survived, I thrived, and I made sure that nobody would ever forget me again. This is my story, and it is only the beginning.